Long before the Lord Lion raised his voice to declare a new chapter of Scottish royalty, there was already a strange tension pulsing through the early morning air. People didn't just arrive at Edinburgh's Market Cross that Sunday. They were pulled toward it, as if some ancient force beneath the cobblestones had awakened and whispered that history was about to shift. Families wrapped in tartan scarves moved like waves through the Royal Mile, children perched on shoulders, elders clutching their walking sticks, and tourists pressing forward with phones trembling in their hands. No one knew exactly what they were waiting for, but everyone felt it. Today was not going to be ordinary, not even close. For weeks, palace insiders had been whispering about the king's worsening condition. Subtle hints, hidden in carefully phrased statements. Cancelled engagements dismissed as routine adjustments. Even the king's televised message urging early cancer checks had left a heaviness that viewers couldn't quite explain. Something in his eyes had looked final. And so when the crowds gathered, they weren't just curious, they were anxious, hopeful, frightened, and deeply aware that the monarchy was standing at a crossroads. Edinburgh, with its storm-washed stone and fierce spirit, felt like the only place where this moment could unfold. The same streets that once echoed with proclamations of Mary, Queen of Scots, now trembled with the murmurs of a new age. The ancient Market Cross itself stood like a sentinel, its unicorn-topped pillar pointing not to tradition, but toward destiny. And in the middle of all this anticipation stood a woman who had never demanded power, yet was now being thrust into the very center of it, Catherine. Even before the scroll was unfurled, even before the Lord Lion stepped forward in his blazing ceremonial tabard, the whispers had already reached her name. Some said the king wanted continuity. Others speculated that Scotland had asked for her directly. But all agreed on one thing. The monarchy had never faced a moment quite like this, where past and present collided in a single breath. Then the hush fell, the kind of silence that presses on the chest. The Lord Lion raised the ancient scroll, and with a voice steady enough to make the statues around him seem to listen, he spoke the words that detonated across the city. His Majesty King Charles, upon entering a new phase of treatment, hereby entrusts the crown of Scotland to Her Majesty Queen Catherine. A gasp rolled through the crowd like a shockwave. People clutched each other, phones shook as they recorded, and for a heartbeat, history seemed to stop moving altogether. And Mary John, before we go deeper into the political storm, the emotional fallout, and Catherine's shocking private reaction to becoming Queen of Scots, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss the next royal twist unfolding right before our eyes. But while the city erupted into a frenzy of cheers, disbelief, and frantic speculation, Catherine herself was nowhere near the cross where her new fate was being shouted to the world. In fact, at that very moment, she was standing alone on the balcony of Holyrood House, staring out of the gray Scottish horizon, as if trying to understand how the ground beneath her life had shifted without her permission. The distant roar of the proclamation reached her only as a faint echo, a reminder that her name, her identity, was being woven into centuries of Scottish history, whether she felt ready or not. And the truth was brutally simple. She wasn't ready, not even close. For months, Catherine had been fighting her own private storm. Recovery is a strange thing. It makes the world move slower while people expect you to move faster. She had tried to smile through engagements, tried to reassure her children, tried to stay strong for William. But the weight of expectation doesn't care about exhaustion, and duty rarely waits for healing. Now, with a single royal declaration, she was thrust into a role that demanded strength she wasn't sure she had left. A role with pressure, scrutiny, and symbolism far larger than one woman's shoulders should carry. Inside her private sitting room, aides rushed back and forth with phones buzzing, messages flooding in, and advisors arguing over protocols that hadn't been used in centuries. Who needed to be informed first? Should a statement be issued immediately? Was she required to appear at the window? Protocols were being dusted off like old relics, and Catherine could feel the atmosphere tightening around her, almost suffocating. Everyone had a plan, everyone had instructions, everyone had expectations, everyone except her. What no one had realized, not yet at least, was how deeply this moment cut into Catherine's private fears. This wasn't merely a symbolic role. Being Queen of Scotland carried political tension, historical weight, and responsibilities that could reshape the very perception of the monarchy. It meant navigating a nation fiercely proud of its identity, one that had watched the crown with both loyalty and suspicion. It meant being the bridge between past fractures and future hopes, all while still recovering, still fragile, still human. And then came the moment that shifted everything again. William entered the room, his expression a mixture of pride and worry, the kind of look that spoke volumes without needing words. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away, but her fingers trembled. "They've announced it," he said softly. She nodded, already knowing. The city had roared loud enough for the castle walls to carry the message straight to her. But instead of embracing the moment, instead of stepping into her new title with confidence, Catherine whispered the words that would change the emotional tone of everything. "I'm not ready for this. Not like this." And William, torn between duty and love, had no answer, because he knew she was right.
The silence that followed Catherine's trembling confession was heavy enough to swallow the room whole. William stood frozen, torn between the instinct to protect his wife and the reality that the machinery of the monarchy had already moved far beyond them. Outside the castle walls, crowds were gathering, news cameras were locking into place, and commentators were already crafting narratives about a strong, unified future. But inside that quiet chamber, the future felt anything but unified. Catherine wasn't refusing her duty. No, that wasn't it. She was mourning the tiny sliver of normalcy she had still been clinging to, the fragile sense of recovery she'd been fighting to maintain. And now, even that had been swept away. Downstairs, palace staff whispered anxiously. Some wondered why Catherine hadn't appeared yet. Others questioned whether the announcement had been made too soon. But there were also those thrilling in the chaos, knowing that history was being written, and they had a front-row seat. Rumors swirled through the hallways like smoke. She broke down in tears. She refused the title. William is furious. It didn't matter that none of it was confirmed. The royal machine runs on whispers long before it runs on facts. Meanwhile, Catherine finally sank onto the edge of the sofa, her shoulders slumped in a way that would have broken the hearts of the public had they been allowed to see it. Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with the crushing weight of responsibility. They don't understand what this means for us, for the children, for everything. William knelt beside her, taking her hands gently. "We'll navigate this together," he promised, though he sounded like a man trying to convince himself as much as her. Up in London, the reaction was even more explosive. Advisors at Buckingham Palace were reportedly blindsided by the speed of events in Scotland. One senior aide, according to insiders, snapped at a colleague. This wasn't supposed to happen today. Another worried that the timing could overshadow other carefully planned royal engagements. But the biggest shockwave came from one unexpected corner, Camilla. She had been briefed late in the afternoon and, according to a palace source, reacted with visible irritation. Some claimed she called the move reckless. Others insisted she muttered something about history repeating itself. But the truth? Only a handful of people in that room will ever know.
As the monarchy scrambled to contain the PR wildfire, Catherine and William sat in their quiet chamber, the world outside spiraling faster than either of them could manage. Advisors urged them to step forward, to appear on the balcony, to solidify the narrative. Catherine hesitated, her heart pounding. She wasn't afraid of Scotland. She wasn't afraid of duty. She was afraid of losing herself, of becoming a symbol before she had healed enough to be a person again. She took a breath, steadying herself, and whispered the question that made William's chest tighten. If I step out there, will I ever be allowed to come back to who I was?
William didn't answer her right away, and that silence said more than any royal briefing ever could. For a moment, the future king looked less like a monarch and more like a husband trying desperately to hold his family together, while the world demanded pieces of them they no longer had the strength to give. Catherine watched him closely, searching his face for reassurance, for a hint that the man she married still had a say in their destiny. But even he, the man raised from birth to stand unshaken before nations, seemed rattled. "Maybe we don't go out there yet," he finally said, his voice low. "Not until you're ready." But they both knew readiness wasn't something the monarchy waited for. It demanded, it consumed, and it expected obedience long before it offered understanding. Down the hallway, advisors were pacing like soldiers preparing for a battle they hadn't trained for. Every minute Catherine remained inside made them more anxious. The press was already speculating, asking why the future queen was absent from Scotland's most historic moment in a decade. Headlines were being drafted, commentators were sharpening theories, and social media was spiraling into a frenzy. There's hesitation within the palace. Catherine may decline the role. A private dispute erupted behind closed doors. The truth wasn't nearly so dramatic, yet somehow also far worse. Catherine wasn't refusing the crown. She was simply overwhelmed by the speed with which the world was trying to place it on her head. Meanwhile, Camilla had reportedly retreated to her private study, a glass of gin and tonic set neatly beside her. She had been blindsided by the Scottish announcement, and insiders claim she believed Catherine should have waited until the palace had shaped the narrative, prepared the public, and positioned her as the next stabilizing force of the monarchy. But Catherine had never cared about palace choreography. Her concern, always, had been the human cost, and now, it seemed, that very humanity was being mistaken for reluctance. Back in the sitting room, Catherine stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress with trembling hands. "They want a queen," she whispered, "but I'm still trying to be a mother, still trying to heal." William stepped forward, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not just a queen," he said. "You're the reason this family still feels human." The words made her chest tighten, a mixture of love and exhaustion coursing through her. That was the burden no one saw, being the monarchy's last remaining anchor of empathy while privately fighting her own battles. A knock at the door interrupted them, a soft, hesitant tap from an aide too afraid to push harder. "Sir, ma'am, the crowd is growing. They're expecting a statement, or at least a sign." William nodded but didn't move. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She knew what was coming. Once she stepped outside, the world would decide the narrative, and she would be expected to live inside it. She opened her eyes, steadier now, but changed. "Let's go," she said quietly. "If they want to see their future, then they should see all of it." The doors opened with a slow, ceremonial weight, as if the castle itself understood the importance of the moment. A burst of cold Scottish air rushed inside, lifting the edges of Catherine's hair and sending a shiver through her. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward with a steadiness that surprised even her. William stayed close, his hand hovering near hers, not touching, not guiding, but supporting with a presence she could feel more than see. The aides parted silently as the couple walked through the corridor, each step echoing as though the palace was announcing them before the world even laid eyes on them. Outside, the murmuring crowd swelled, sensing movement from within. Cameras readjusted, microphones tilted forward, and reporters leaned in with the kind of hunger that only royal drama could feed. But the moment Catherine emerged, a hush fell across the courtyard. Not because she put on a polished, queenly performance, but because she didn't. Her face carried the emotional residue of the day, strength layered over exhaustion, grace woven into vulnerability. And strangely, that authenticity electrified the crowd more than any perfect royal pose ever could. She paused, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. Some held signs welcoming her as the next queen. Others simply watched, breathless, waiting for confirmation that the monarchy still had its heart. Catherine took a breath, one that trembled at the edges, but when she spoke, her voice carried with a clarity that silenced even the most frantic camera shutters. "Thank you for being here," she began. Not a grand proclamation, not a scripted declaration, just gratitude, simple, human, and disarming. William stepped beside her, adding his own steadying presence. "We are committed to this nation," he said, the words chosen carefully but delivered sincerely, "and to continuing the work that matters to so many of you." Together they formed an image neither the palace nor the press had fully anticipated. Not a flawless, armored future king and queen, but two people stepping into a storm hand in hand. Behind them, advisors exchanged glances, some relieved, others calculating. Even Camilla, watching from a window above, couldn't hide the flicker of surprise on her face. She had expected Catherine to falter, to waver, to need rescuing. Instead, Catherine had done something far more unsettling to the palace structure. She had been genuine. And in that authenticity, she had revived a kind of public loyalty the monarchy hadn't seen in years. As the crowd erupted into applause, Catherine felt a strange clarity wash over her. The crown wasn't something she would accept because of duty alone. It was something she would carry because the people believed in her. Not the perfected image, not the polished facade, but the woman who could stand before them with her fears still visible and still choose to show up. When she and William finally stepped back inside, the weight hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. It felt shared now, neither crushing nor impossible. An aide approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, the world is calling you your future queen." Catherine exchanged a look with William, her expression soft but firm. "Good," she said quietly. "Then let's make sure they're getting a queen who's real." And with that, she walked forward, not as a symbol forced into place, but as a woman stepping into history on her own terms.